Alhamdulillah wa kafa wa salamun ala ibadihi alladhina istafa amma ba'd. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun. Wa salamun alal mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Allahumma salli ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali sayyidina Muhammad wa barik wa sallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in hadith that there will come a time for my ummah when they will love 5 things and forget 5 things. There will come a time for my ummah, my community, when they will fall in love with 5 things and they will become forgetful of 5 things. They will love this life and forget the life to come. They will love this life and forget the life to come. They will love the dunya and forget the akhirah. They will love property, wealth, possessions and forget the grave. They will love mal and forget the qabr. They will forget their death. They will love wealth and forget the day of judgment. They will love their children and forget the truth. And they will love themselves and forget Allah. And they will love themselves and they will forget Allah. They have nothing to do to me. They have nothing to do with me, and I have nothing to do with them. In this hadith, the Blessed Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam meant, this is one of the interesting hadith in the Sunnah, in which the Prophet ﷺ mentions initially to the Sahaba things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed to him, things that would become prevalent in his ummah to come. This particular hadith does not fall in the category of the signs of the Day of Judgment. This is not anything to do per se with the end of time, qurb qiyamah, the proximity of the end. It's simply something to do with the notion that, and however those hadith that do talk about the end of time suggest that the Muslim philosophy of history is that human beings are going towards a spiritual decline. In other words, much of the Western philosophy of history is that human beings continually make progress, and that progress is normally measured on material or scientific terms. The Islamic philosophy of history, when you understand that the hadith point to number one, or our theology points number one to the fact that this entire world will end. The dunya will come to an end, there will be a day of judgment, there will be a hereafter. And then the moment that dunya will come to an end, there are going to be a series of events that lead to the end of this world, and those events are marked by spiritual decline or religious decline. Now within that philosophy then of spiritual decline, there are another sort of whole set of ahadith in which the Prophet mentioned specific aspects in the way that he forecasted or he knew beforehand that the ummah would decline. So in this particular hadith, again in this collection by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, there are 5 things that are mentioned. Number 1 is that this ummah, they will love this life, they will love the dunya, and they will forget the life to come, they will forget the akhirah. Now there are many ways to understand this hadith, and what really the adab or the humility or the courtesy that the Muslims always had to such hadith is that they would wonder, does this hadith apply to me? In other words, they would be worried, they would be scared that am I one of those members of the ummah whom the Prophet was worried about whom he predicted that they would fall into a spiritual decline. So it befits me that I should study these hadith in depth and try to see if those signs are present in me. And if those signs are present in me, then I should do my best to change them so that I am successful in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I am able to earn His pleasure, and I am not a source of disappointment to my beloved Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam on the Day of Judgment. So the first sign being mentioned here is that they love the dunya, they will love this life, the dunya, and forget the life to come. Now what exactly is dunya? There's a lot of people have a lot of misconception on this. Islam, again, being a religion, being a revealed religion, being a spiritual phenomenon, does not actually take a material definition of dunya. In other words, the dunya does not necessarily mean material objects, material goods. The dunya, basically the way we understand dunya, it's a 2-part definition. Number 1, dunya is ghayrullah. In order for something to be called dunya, it has to be other than Allah. And number 2, it has to distract you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in other words, dunya is simply that ghayrullah that makes you ghafil anillah, that thing which is other than Allah that distracts you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that distraction can take place in many levels. Distracts you from His remembrance, distracts you from His obedience, distracts you from staying away from those things that He has prohibited, distracts you from the adab, the courtesy and the humility that you're supposed to have towards Him, towards His revelation, towards His messengers, towards the teachings of His messenger. So dunya then does not mean necessarily having the material world. There are many people who might be financially well off who do not have hubb dunya or love of the dunya in their heart. And there might be people who are not that financially, materially well off, but they have hubb of dunya in their life. Let me give you a few sort of very basic or baby examples. If a person, right, it's just an example. It's normally an example we use for a man, but we will use it for you today. Because I'm sure there must be some women who might also have this in them. That if a person is so much a fan of sports, if a person, let's take, is such a big cricket fan, that following the cricket match or watching that cricket game on television distracts them from the remembrance of Allah, or distracts them from his or her obligation or duty towards Allah, then that means watching cricket is dunya. Now you'd understand what I meant, that there are many people who might not be financially well off, who might also have something in them which is called dunya, right? There are many people who might sit glued to a television match. Now what does this mean? One level it could mean that they're so involved in watching the match that they won't pray their salah. Or, at best, that they'll get up but they'll hurriedly pray 2 rakats or 4 rakats with the intention that they have to get back to their match immediately because they don't even want to miss a single ball or pitch or wicket or whatever you call it, right? That's also a type of distraction. So in other words, dunya is anything that is other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and anything, in other words, anything of this world, but in order for it to be negatively viewed, it has to be something in this world that is distracting us from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And sometimes you have people who take the other extreme, right? Some people who adopt a path of otherworldliness to a much larger extreme. For example, I once had a student who asked me this question from America, that she said that she wanted to leave Starbucks coffee because she felt that Starbucks coffee was dunya. And that because she was a student on this path of tasawwuf, and tasawwuf teaches that you should not have a love for the dunya in her heart, so she felt that, well, I love my Starbucks coffee, and therefore she took a qasam, she took an oath to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that for 40 days I will not drink Starbucks coffee. And she completed that. And then she fell back into it and she started drinking Starbucks coffee and she felt bad. So I explained to her that drinking Starbucks coffee, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That is not dunya. Unless for some reason, somehow, we can conceptualize her drinking of that coffee as distracting her from Allah. There's nothing wrong with somebody being hooked on Starbucks coffee or PTC chai or Tropicana orange juice or cookies and cream ice cream. These things are not dunya, right? And when you look at the early pious Muslims, the mujahidah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to see, the struggle that He wants to see, He doesn't want us to bring this entire disdain for the dunya that perhaps even somebody might argue Rabia Basriya had. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to bring is the mujahidah that Rabia Basriya had, that she was regular in her tahajjud, that she had a feeling in her salah, that she made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that she was a person of taqwa, she stayed away from sin and disobedience, she was a person of haya and modesty and chastity. These are the types of mujahidah, the types of spiritual struggle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants a person to do. Sometimes we trick ourselves or we deceive ourselves by putting our efforts into these trivial things. So leaving Starbucks coffee is entirely trivial. In fact, at most, if you wanted to conceive of this as some type of mujahidah, it would mean that drinking Starbucks coffee or not drinking that coffee should have no effect on you at all. It should just be meaningless activity that is devoid of any type of meaning. So dunya then is that thing that distracts us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but particularly now, to get back to the hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam linked it to a particular type of distraction, and that is, again, they will love this life and forget the life to come, right? So there will be members of this ummah who we will become so absorbed in this world that we will forget the akhirah, right? And many times it's very difficult for a person on their own to figure out this balance. What is the balance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the deen of Islam wants me to keep between the quote-unquote dunya, right, which is the permissible activities of this world, and the akhirah, which is preparation for the ultimate life, eternal life in the hereafter. And it's interestingly, many people even quote this dua, and the dua itself is a perfect way to understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to do. But the dua is misunderstood and misquoted. And the dua is something that all of you know, رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. Right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in this dua we're turning to our Rabb, and the way it's normally presented is that, look, Allah is touching this dua to ask the dunya and ask the akhirah. That is true, right? But that is half the story. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught us in this dua to ask for, to make dua, Rabbana atina fid dunya hasana. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we ask you of this dunya the hasanat. We don't ask you the dunya mutlaq. We don't ask of you this world in an absolute, unqualified, unrestricted way. The Qur'an al-Kareem, the dua itself is teaching us that we, to the extent that we are allowed to partake of the dunya, is to the extent that we partake of the hasanat, or of the noble things, the beautiful things, the virtuous things, or at least the permissible things of this world. So that dua is not anywhere a license. That no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself in the Quran taught us to make dua that we partake of those things that distract us from Him. The hasanat of the dunya by definition are those things that do not fall under the other definition of dunya. In other words, the hasanat of the dunya are those things that do not distract us from Allah, or remembrance of death, or remembrance of the afterlife, or remembrance of our purpose on earth, or remembrance of our primal and primary identity as the ibad, or the servants and slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those are the hasanat, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught us in the Quran that we should ask, we should make dua for those hasanat of the dunya. And then obviously to make dua of the hasanat of the akhirah, which means the reward and the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter, and also to ask for salvation from the hellfire. So then that said, okay, so the first option has been removed. Normally people say, no, Allah said balance this world and the akhirah. No, in that sense Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not asking us to balance it. So in what sense are we being asked to balance this world? Basically, if any one of us wants to assess or understand or discover whether we have that balance or not, we simply have to look at this hadith and think that, okay, to whatever extent I'm partaking in this dunya, is there any way, any activity, any set of activities, or perhaps my entire lifestyle, or perhaps my entire mentality that is distracting me from the akhirah? If we find that the dunya is distracting us from the akhirah, that means that there's an imbalance. And if there's someone who is so focused on the akhirah that they don't earn a halal livelihood, they are not fulfilling the rights of their spouses, their children, their families, themselves, the rights of society, if they find that in them, then they can say they're also imbalanced on the other side. But there are very few people like that left in this world, right? You can honestly say that they are so absorbed in the akhirah that they have forgotten their rights and responsibilities in this world. The vast majority of us fall into the first category. Right? And that means we need to take practical steps to remind ourselves of the akhirah, to not become people who forget the life to come. This should be our fear. That the Prophet ﷺ was worried about people in his ummah who would forget 5 things. The first one is to forget the akhirah. Now how is it that we can keep the akhirah in mind, in view, while partaking of this dunya, while studying or working or whatever we do? And there are 2 basic things that help us to do that. The first are sohbah, or gatherings of remembrance. In other words, and sometimes I'm not really sure once a week is necessarily enough for that, but we need sometimes to pull ourselves out of the environment, of our daily environment, our daily habit, our daily routine. Because in general you will find that it's part of human nature that if you want to become a person of reflection, then you have to disconnect yourself, you have to disattach yourself from your routine life. If there's a person who wants in academia to go into research, right, then that means they have to cut themselves out from teaching, they have to cut themselves off from institutional responsibilities, and they have to, only when they reach a certain level of detachment will they be able to enter any level of reflection. And the Deen of Islam has so many things, right? So many things that suggest this disconnection, this detachment from our regular life. For men, the prayer of Jummah at an obligatory level, and for women for an optional level, even the prayer or attending the khutbah or the discourse given at the Jummah Salah is a way of detaching ourselves, to take ourselves out from our work environment, from our study environment, and put ourselves in the masjid. In fact, the whole philosophy of masajid, right? And that's also a very central